Hi, I'm Steve from Squawk Box. I want you to take a little look with me at the goings-on with regard to the government decision to take over a large part of the functions of Liverpool City Council. It's been a circus of hypocrisy from the Tories, but also from the Labour Party in the way that they behave towards the people of Liverpool and Labour members in Liverpool in particular. And I want you to have a look at that with me. So this is a little bit of what we saw this week from Tory Secretary of State for Communities, Robert Jenrick, and his announcement that he made this week. And it's just a little, very short section, but it gives a flavour as to where he's coming from.
Dysfunctional management practices, no coherent business plan, and the awarding of dubious contracts. A failure of proper process relating to property management.
Failure of proper process regarding property management. Isn't that interesting? It's only considerably less than a year since Robert Jenrick was in the headlines because of his own failure of proper process in regard to property management. Last January, Mr. Jenrick signed off and forced officials to sign off on a property deal for billionaire Richard Desmond. He ordered officials to push through the planning approval to ensure that Richard Desmond avoided having to pay around 45 million in local council levies that would have gone towards building new schools, hospitals, providing local services, etc. Robert Jenrick's pretext for his measures in Liverpool has been that the Liverpool Council was not delivering best value for people in the city. Now, I have no drum to bang for the largely right-wing regime that has run Liverpool City Council on behalf of the Labour Party for a good long while. But it should be borne out, those charges have not been proven yet with regard to any kind of corruption. The police have dropped bail conditions against Liverpool's former mayor. And, those things will come out in the wash. We'll find out exactly what was going on. But the point is, if you think there is corruption, you remove and punish the corrupt. You don't punish a whole city for the way that a few people have allegedly behaved, and it is only allegations at the moment. But the massive point is the fact that, we have a Tory party which has, given dodgy deals to its cronies and donors for, throughout this pandemic and before that. And in January last year, before the pandemic kicked off, we see that Robert Jenrick was telling his officials to push through a planning approval in order to save a Tory donor money. And we saw as well, only 2 weeks after that scheme and his act to push that scheme through, Mr. Desmond gave £12,000 donation to the Conservatives. And Robert Jenrick denied that there was any connection between the two things, but the timing was certainly very close. We also saw that it wasn't just a question of Robert Jenrick deciding that it was a good idea to push this deal through, and nobody gave him any advice to the contrary. So we see that officials begged Robert Jenrick, begged him, it's a strong word, to kill the deal off. Richard Desmond was also claiming at the time that Boris Johnson had promised to change gambling laws to benefit him as well. This is a Tory government which has decided that they're going to give Liverpool a hard time because of the behaviour of some of its councillors in not giving best value, and because of alleged failures in practice, proper procedures and processes, Robert Jenrick said this week. And yet only last year, this is what we see them doing. And this is even before they started pouring money by the tanker load into the pockets of their donors through various contracts to do with the pandemic. That wasn't the end of it. When his actions started to come to light, Robert Jenrick refused to turn up and answer questions about his unlawful help for the scheme. And he accepted that he had behaved unlawfully. And yet when it came time for him to answer questions from MPs, he declined to turn up and instead sent a minion to face the music so he didn't have to. So this is the guy that this week was turning his sights on the city of Liverpool. Now, if that's not enough, an anti-corruption expert said that he should have resigned because of his conduct. And then just this week, we've seen Priti Patel's expenses, £77,000 and a bit more, to a firm called Beautiful Brows. Not to mention £2,000 on a diet consultant and £30,000 to a beauty firm that apparently also made PPE, but it's not clear what the money was spent on. How's that best value for the taxpayers? And of course, the other massive point is that Liverpool, at the hands of the Tories, has suffered absolutely swinging, enormous cuts to its funding, and the council has had far less to work with. It's obviously a question, if you want value, you've got to provide people something to provide value with. Cutting back one of the most deprived areas in the country with such a level of severity that it's unable to provide services and is struggling and scrambling around for the cuts that it can make and the savings it can make in order to do that is bound to lead to problems. And we've seen with the City of Liverpool, very well pointed out by Simon Hughes, this is not a defence of Joe Anderson at all, but Liverpool suffered a 58% budget cut under Tory austerity between 2010 and 2017. So if Jenrick talks about a pervasive and rotten culture, he might want to think about the consequences of his own party's decisions. And there's been a very good article published this week on the Labour Hub website by Steve Latchford, and he points out very accurately that the level of these cuts has been worsened by the collaboration of right-wing Labour figures with those cuts in imposing those on the city. So he writes, while some local Labour members are wearily accepting that there is no alternative but to accept the situation, many on the left are less sanguine. They point out that under Anderson, the local authority acted as a reluctant conduit, and they were reluctant, but they still did it, for government spending cuts. Those who opposed the cuts were told again and again that the authority had to reduce spending or commissioners would be sent in. Well, we're seeing commissioners come in, and he writes, now that precisely that eventuality has come to pass, sensible socialism looks to be a busted flush. So the entire stream of so-called Labour thought that has said, we've got to cooperate with the Tories on this. We can't stand up and resist. If we do, we're just going to end up with, really bad consequences in the city being run by the Tories. Well, they did all that, and we're still ending up with a large part of the city being run by the Tories. We saw as well then, when it came time to respond to that statement by Robert Jenrick, we saw that Steve Reid, his opposite number on the Labour front bench, got up
Liverpool
and
City
welcomed
Council
his
has been
move
found
and said he was going to back it.
Wanting. Labour, both here and our leadership at the City Council, accept this report in full. The Council will respond to the Secretary of State's letter in detail, but we support his intention to appoint commissioners, not at this stage to run the Council, as he says, but to advise and support elected.
So we saw Steve Turner get up, welcome that, say that the Labour Party would be supporting that. Steve Reid is a director of Labour Together, and Labour Together was found to have failed to declare its donations it had received within the legally required timescale, to the tune of, I think, a little bit over £800,000. People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, etc. So, but that's not the end of it. We also see that Steve Reid was a big supporter of a certain David Evans, who is now the acting General Secretary of the Labour Party. Last year, when Evans's interim appointment, as it really is, was announced, Steve Reid, who was a Croydon MP, came out and greeted that, it says, with enthusiasm. Fantastic news. David's the best choice to help Labour win the next election. Worked with him in Lambeth and Croydon. An outstanding appointment, said the chair of Labour Together. So we've seen a good amount of enthusiasm there, obviously very close. David Evans was based in Croydon with his political consultancy, and his appointment was welcomed by Steve Reid. Last year, the leader of Croydon Council resigned after being suspended by the Labour Party because of cash issues and budget issues within the council. In November, it says here, according to the Inside Croydon website, the council was forced to issue a Section 114 notice, unable to balance its budget, in part because of the risk that council-owned building company, Brick by Brick, would fail to pay over £36 million this year in loan repayments, interest owed, and profits. Brick by Brick was a CIC, as I understand it, set up by the council. But we saw in July 2018 that there were already issues with transparency, the failure for the deputy leader of the council, working with the council leader, Tony Newman, who resigned, who failed to declare her interests in the campaign company, which is or was David Evans's firm. It's now owned by his wife. Series of failures to declare interest by the town hall's deputy leader, despite family links to a consultancy which has been handed hundreds of thousands of pounds of contracts by Croydon Council. Town hall contracts worth almost £200,000 have been awarded over the past 4 years to the company, which has close family ties to Alison Butler, deputy leader of the council. Now, that same firm, the campaign company, is being hired to run public consultations on behalf of Brick by Brick, the council's wholly owned housing developer, for which Butler, as a cabinet member responsible, has a direct responsibility. Butler has not declared her close family connections to the campaign company. I understand she has close family connections to David Evans. And so the campaign company was benefiting directly from this Brick by Brick, which at the same time was about to bring down the council leader and cause huge problems for the council's budget because of its failure to be able to pay up funds that it owed. And it's not limited to Steve Reid. As Director of Labour Together, along with Lisa Nandy and others, he bears some responsibility for the fact that the company, a vast majority of the money that it had in within a period of a couple of years, hadn't been declared in the right timescale. But Companies House records show that Keir Starmer has very close links to this. Apart from appointing Steve Reid, Keir Starmer also employs Morgan McSweeney as his chief of staff. Morgan McSweeney was Secretary of Labour Together for a couple of years, but he also worked, it says here, for 2 years, from 2007 to 2009. Mr. McSweeney worked for the campaign company, the Croydon-based consultancy set up by David Evans, who is now the Labour Party's General Secretary. So why does that matter? Why, apart from the apparent issues in terms of links and funding from Croydon Council, why does that matter in terms of Keir Starmer having these very close links in appointing David Evans and Morgan McSweeney and Steve Reid then on the front bench as well? A leaked report showed last week that the Labour Party had been paying funds to the campaign company, the same company that David Evans owned previously and apparently gave up his ownership when he became the General Secretary of the Labour Party. But that controlling interest in the company was taken up by his wife. So he still has a very strong family link. And a political report that was leaked last week had at the bottom of each page the campaign company's TCC Values First logo, showing that they were paid for the work that they were doing for the party. And there is nothing to indicate, and the Labour Party hasn't responded to a request to clarify that there was any competitive bidding process in how that contract was awarded, how much money was given to this company, which is owned by David Evans's partner. We also see that the system that the Labour Party has started to use for online ballots at CLP meetings, constituency party meetings, etc., and non-voter, and that company that provides that system is also owned by another very close ally of David Evans and of the former leader of Croydon Council. Squawk Box phoned up that company to find out a little bit about how that contract had been awarded, and the owner confirmed that there had been no competitive tender process. We had conversations, we proposed a contract, and they accepted it, and that's how it works. 2 contracts awarded there, apparently without competitive bidding, to people who have very close links to the General Secretary of the Labour Party, and through him to the Chief of Staff of Keir Starmer's office. The Tories stood up and said what they were going to do in Liverpool, and Steve Reid, on behalf of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, stood up and said they were going to welcome that and support it. And they're now planning to put in Jackie Smith to oversee a Labour investigation. That would be the same Jackie Smith whose husband, according to the media, funded his pornographic subscription through parliamentary expenses claimed by his wife. That's a dog's breakfast of hypocrisy. But the even more important point on this really is the fact that, if there have been issues in Liverpool with regard to the Labour-run council, those issues have been managed and the reins held by people who were from the right wing of the Labour Party. It's been a right-dominated machine here for a long time, and the right fought tooth and nail throughout the Corbyn leadership to retain that control and make sure that the left didn't get a chance to prise their fingers off it. So we have, the poacher coming in to investigate another poacher, if there is one, and do the government's dirty work for them at the same time. And the poor old city of Liverpool is getting its name blackened yet again, and being mistreated by the government and by the supposed opposition, which is again doing anything but opposing, but actually they're, Boris Johnson saying, right, I'm going to get Liverpool. They are a thorn in our side and they don't do what we want. I'm going to take it out on them. And Keir Starmer's version of opposition is, I'm going to hold your coat. What a sad, sorry, abysmal, pathetic and damnable state of affairs. And what a disgrace the current Labour regime is to the name of the Labour Party and to the actual concept of a Labour movement and, the solidarity and all the other stuff that goes with that. Don't be, making Liverpool the byword and a distraction for, the utter incompetence and murderousness, frankly, of the Tory government or of the complete lack of leadership and opposition from the Labour Party. Thank you. That's been me from Squawk Box, and I hope it's been a little bit illuminating.